The video playback abruptly terminated as an official government banner overlaid my screen, warning that unauthorized accounts were spreading dangerous misinformation regarding parasitic control and urging all citizens to submit to mandatory household health screenings without resistance. As I read the warning text, my left hand slid off my desk pad and began moving toward the keyboard again with a slow, creeping deliberation that made my skin crawl. Acting on pure instinct, I reached across my torso with my right hand and seized my left wrist, clamping my fingers down hard to halt its progression toward my computer's power switch. The trapped fingers twitched and flexed against my grip like a dying spider, pulling with a sudden localized strength that strained my shoulder tendons, and I suddenly understood the true meaning behind the public safety alert's instruction, never to restrain an affected limb. The alert hadn't been issued by health officials trying to prevent self-inflicted injuries. It had been sent by whatever network or entity was orchestrating the infection, instructing its hosts not to interfere with the contagion's motor mapping process. For 5 agonizing seconds, my left arm fought against my right with a cold, relentless determination, until the muscles suddenly relaxed, the tension draining out of the limb leaving it soft and pliant in my grasp. When I looked back at my laptop screen, I realized that during the brief struggle, the fingers of my left hand had managed to tap a keyboard combination that closed the browser window entirely, leaving my desktop blank just as a heavy fist pounded on our downstairs front door. A muffled, amplified voice called out from the street, announcing that a mandatory medical evaluation team was conducting household inspections and ordering all occupants to present themselves at the threshold immediately. My mother's voice rang out from the bottom of the stairs, shouting a bright, cheerful acknowledgement that she was coming, which sent me sprinting out of my bedroom and down the steps to intercept them before they could expose us. I reached the lower landing just as my father grasped the brass handle of the front door, while my mother stood rigid beside him, her lips moving silently as she rehearsed the exact words the medical worker had just spoken through the door. I threw myself between them and the entryway, begging my father not to turn the lock, but he looked at me with an expression of profound, tragic helplessness, whispering that they had no choice because the workers were here to help us. Before I could physically pull his arm away, my mother repeated his assertion in a flat, monotone voice, and my father's right hand smoothly twisted the deadbolt, throwing the door wide open to reveal 4 protective-suited technicians waiting on the porch. The moment the door opened, my father's expression twisted into a mask of absolute horror as he looked down at his own hand, which had begun reaching out toward the lead technician's medical kit without his consent. My mother experienced a simultaneous violent physical schism. Her left hand lunged forward and twisted itself tightly into the utility fabric of a worker's protective vest, while the entire right side of her body threw its weight backward, nearly tearing her shoulder from its socket in a desperate bid to escape. She stared at her offending knuckles with wide, terrified eyes, crying out that she wasn't doing this and that her body was betraying her, until 2 technicians stepped forward and discharged a specialized chemical subduing spray directly onto my parents' exposed skin. The aerosol mist caused their limbs to immediately lose their rigidity, allowing the workers to easily guide them out onto the porch while my father wept and demanded that they give him a cognitive test to prove his mind was still intact. As they dragged my mother down the steps toward the waiting transport van, she fought against the chemical sedation, turning her face toward me and crying out that she was still herself inside her head. Halfway through her desperate plea, her vocal cords seized and her pitch dropped into that flat, mechanical cadence, causing her to repeat the phrase "still myself" over and over like a broken record, even as genuine human tears streamed down her cheeks. Then, in a terrifying flash of clarity, she seemed to break through the echolalic loop, turning her head toward the doorway and screaming for me to run away and hide before they took me as well. The technicians efficiently hoisted both of my parents into the rear of the vehicle, slamming the heavy doors shut and cutting off my mother's screams, leaving me standing frozen on the threshold with my left hand buried deep inside the pocket of my hoodie. One of the workers, a tall woman wearing a pressurized respirator and a clear face shield that obscured everything except her sharp, clinical eyes, stepped up onto the porch and asked if there were any other residents inside the home. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat and shook my head, keeping my voice remarkably level as I told her I was alone, answering no to her subsequent rapid-fire questions regarding numbness, involuntary twitches, or echolalic speech patterns. After studying my face for a long, silent moment, she instructed me to remove both of my hands from my pockets and hold them out in front of me with my palms facing upward. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly withdrew my right hand, followed by my left, bracing my entire mental focus for the inevitable moment when my infected fingers would betray me and reach for her suit. To my absolute astonishment, my left hand remained completely tranquil and loose, floating beside my right without the slightest tremor or involuntary twitch as the worker shone a diagnostic penlight across my palms. She instructed me to flip my hands over, spread my fingers wide, and methodically touch the tip of each finger to my thumb in a rapid sequence to test my neurological articulation and motor latency. I sent the command to my hands, and both limbs executed the complex finger-tapping drill with flawless symmetrical perfection, moving with a natural grace that caused the tension in the worker's shoulders to visibly drop. After shining her light into my eyes to check for pupillary dilation and asking me a few basic orientation questions, all of which I answered without a single hesitation, she lowered her clipboard and declared that I showed no signs of neuromuscular infection. She explained that while my parents were being taken to a specialized clinical facility for containment and treatment, uninfected residents in our sector were being systematically evacuated to temporary safe centers, while the city underwent deep chemical sanitation. When I asked where the clean transport buses were taking us, she promised I would be safe at an auditorium on the west side of the city, instructing me to pack a small bag and wait inside until the transport vehicles arrived for the uninfected population. As I opened my mouth to confess the truth, to tell her about my browser history, the episode at my desk, and the invisible weight in my left arm, my left hand suddenly curled into a fist inside my pocket, pressing its fingernails so hard into my palm that the sharp physical pain instantly cut off my words. I nodded silently, stepped back into the house, and locked the heavy front door behind her, leaning my forehead against the cool wood while my left hand slowly relaxed its grip, leaving 5 deep crescent indentations in my palm. Standing alone in the silent hallway, the realization that my left hand had actively chosen to remain still during the medical inspection frightened me far more than any of its previous erratic behaviors. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated in my pocket with an official government evacuation notice, instructing all non-symptomatic residents to prepare a single personal bag and remain ready for immediate transport to secure zones. The instant I finished reading the text on my screen, my left hand detached itself from my conscious control entirely, reaching out to grab my school backpack off the hallway hook and systematically zipping open the compartments. I stood watching like a helpless passenger in my own body as my arm reached into the downstairs laundry basket, grabbed a clean shirt, retrieved my phone charger from the kitchen counter, and efficiently packed the bag without me ever sending a single motor command. When the rumble of the clean transport bus echoed from the far end of the street 10 minutes later, my hand reached out, grabbed my winter coat off the banister, and then immediately went entirely limp, returning full, seamless control to my brain just as the doorbell rang. I opened the door, passed a second battery of neurological articulation tests administered by the bus driver with flying colors, and climbed aboard the vehicle, taking a seat among 30 other neighborhood residents who all appeared just as relieved and exhausted as I was. Every passenger on the bus had passed the same stringent diagnostic screenings, and upon our arrival at a sprawling high school complex on the western edge of the city, workers in biohazard suits issued us green plastic wristbands to signify our uninfected status before guiding us into the massive gymnasium. That was 24 hours ago, and I have spent the entire day sitting on my assigned cot, typing out this account in disjointed paragraphs on my phone because I need someone in the outside world to know that my parents were still human when they were locked in that van. When I first arrived here, I genuinely believed that my infection was simply weaker or slower to develop than my parents', assuming that I had managed to overpower the contagion through sheer willpower and early detection. Sitting here in the dim light of the auditorium, watching the green wristbands on the hundreds of people around me, I finally understand the horrifying truth. The contagion controlling my body wasn't weak, it was calculating. It had recognized the diagnostic testing procedures of the medical teams, and it had deliberately forced my arm to remain still and cooperative during the screening, because it had no desire to be taken to a research laboratory or a quarantine facility. The entity inside my nervous system had packed my bag, hidden its presence, and mimicked perfect human motor control for one specific terrifying reason. It wanted to board that bus and ride safely into the heart of the uninfected sanctuary. All around me in the cavernous auditorium, the illusion of safety is beginning to silently unravel, A middle-aged woman sitting on the cot directly across from mine has spent the last 10 minutes tapping her index finger 4 times against her metal bed frame, pausing for 3 seconds, and then repeating the sequence. A few moments ago, a teenage girl 3 rows away tilted her head at the exact same angle and began echoing the 4-tap cadence against her knee, and now I can hear the subtle, synchronized clicking of fingernails against metal echoing from dozens of cots across the dark room. Whenever an armed guard or a medical technician patrols down the center aisle, the tapping instantly ceases, the room falling into a dead, obedient silence until the heavy doors swing shut behind the workers. An official announcement has just echoed over the auditorium's public address system, assuring us that the perimeter is fully secured and that we are completely safe from the outbreak ravaging the rest of the city. A man sitting near the emergency exits immediately opened his mouth and repeated the announcement using the exact same clinical inflection as the loudspeaker, followed a split second later by an elderly woman near the stage who echoed the phrase with identical pitch and timing. Dozens of people wearing green wristbands are slowly sitting up on their cots now, their movements fluid and synchronized as they turn their heads toward the sealed double doors at the front of the gymnasium. My left hand is no longer fighting my attempts to type this final sentence. It is resting quietly beside my phone on the blanket, perfectly patient, waiting for the signal to open the doors from the inside.